The lights went down. The roar of the crowd echoed through the stadium. And then it hit, a wall of sound from Ozzy Osbourne's band, louder than thunder. This was no ordinary night. This was the final show, the end of a legendary era. And among the shadows on stage, a figure emerged, guitar in hand, fire in his fingers. Jake E. Lee. People were stunned. Some didn't even realize he was back. After years away from the spotlight, Jake E. Lee wasn't supposed to be there. But there he stood, grinning, his white hair glowing under the lights, and playing like it was 1983 all over again. And when he tore into the opening riff of Bark at the Moon, fans lost their minds. Some even cried. This was the same man who once helped Ozzy Osbourne rebuild his career after Randy Rhoads died. The same man who co-wrote some of Ozzy's heaviest, weirdest, and most emotional music. And now, out of nowhere, here he was, alive, on fire, and in front of a crowd that had almost forgotten him. But what most people didn't know was that Jake's journey to that moment almost never happened. He wasn't just returning to the stage. He was rising from the ashes after years of silence, heartbreak, and something far more terrifying than bad reviews or forgotten fame. Because not long ago, Jake E. Lee was nearly killed. Shot. Not once, but 3 times. And he never talked about it. Until now. From guitar god to ghost. In the mid-1980s, Jake E. Lee was everywhere. He wasn't just Ozzy's guitarist. He was the guitarist. He had the look, the attitude, and more than anything else, he had the sound. Clean, aggressive, weirdly melodic. Nobody else played quite like Jake. He helped turn songs like Shot in the Dark and The Ultimate Sin into stadium anthems. But then, just like that, he disappeared. Fans were confused. Ozzy replaced him with Zakk Wylde. Rumors spread. Was Jake fired? Did he quit? Was he too hard to work with? But the truth was even more painful. Jake didn't just vanish from the spotlight. He vanished from the world of music. For years, he didn't tour, didn't record, and rarely even picked up a guitar. Some said he was living in Las Vegas, running a martial arts school. Others said he was battling depression. Jake later admitted that the way he was fired hurt more than fans ever knew. Ozzy and Sharon Osbourne never even told him directly. One day he was in the band. The next day he was gone. No phone call. No goodbye. Just silence. He became a ghost. A legend that people whispered about, but rarely saw. And then, just when people thought his story was over, life took an even darker turn. Because Jake E. Lee was in the wrong place at the worst possible time. The day Jake E. Lee was shot. It wasn't on a stage. It wasn't in a studio. It was a quiet night. Jake E. Lee was just going about his life. Nobody expected anything unusual. But out of nowhere, gunshots. Jake was shot 3 times. The details are still unclear. He doesn't talk much about who did it or why. But what we do know is this. It almost killed him. He was rushed to the hospital, barely conscious. The bullets tore through his body, and doctors weren't sure he'd survive. His hands, the very hands that had once shredded some of Ozzy's most iconic solos, were damaged. But Jake didn't die. Somehow, against all odds, he made it. Recovery wasn't fast. It wasn't clean. He was in pain, both physical and emotional. The trauma wasn't just in his body, it was in his mind. He thought his career was over. Maybe his life, too. He stayed silent for a long time. No press, no social media, just silence. But somewhere in that silence, something started to grow. A fire, a need to return. Not for fame, not for revenge, but for himself. And when he finally came back, he wasn't the same. Red Dragon Cartel and the Rise Again. Jake E. Lee didn't want to just return as a nostalgia act. He didn't want to play the same songs and pretend nothing had changed. He formed a new band, Red Dragon Cartel. The music was heavier, darker, more personal. It wasn't just about showing off guitar skills. It was about telling a story. The first album came out in 2014. It hit hard. Songs like Deceived and Shout It Out proved Jake still had that spark. But this time, it wasn't about Ozzy. It wasn't about the 80s. It was about survival. Jake poured his pain into the music. The betrayal, the loss, the trauma of getting shot. Every riff was a scream. Every solo was a battle cry. He started touring again. The crowds weren't as big, but they were loyal. Some travel miles just to see him, to tell him he saved their lives. He smiled more now, but behind the smile was a man who had seen too much. And every time he stepped on stage, it felt like a victory. But nothing could prepare fans for what would happen next. Because years after leaving Ozzy's band behind, after surviving bullets and betrayal, Jake E. Lee would be called back to the place it all began. Ozzy Osbourne's final show.